So welcome everybody, welcome to our lovely event this week with Naomi Novik to celebrate the launch of A Deadly Education, which came out this week. And this is obviously in conjunction with Forbidden Planet, so I'm the book buyer there. So yes, yeah, we've got signed copies on the way as well, so that I know lots of people have pre-ordered, and there are some unsigned copies if you can't wait. Or there's some signed copies coming very, very soon. So we're going to kick off with the first question for this evening. How has publication week been treating you, Naomi?
This has been a very strange week. It's just for the world, for my country. It's been very odd. so it's been a little disorienting. But it's obviously publication week is always fun because for all this time you spend all this time with your book, and it and it's done for you, and then you try to, and then you realize nobody else knows, and then all of a sudden it's like it's free, it's floating out into the world, so that's always good. It's always nice to have it out there.
Oh wow. So one of my neighbours, I think it's their birthday, because someone's just kicking out with happy birthday, so we could do happy birthday to the book as well.
Right.
You can hear that. Perfect. There we go. Round of applause, everyone. Couldn't have timed that better.
Excellent.
I know. So I always love watching people's responses to when a book comes out. And I saw on Twitter, I think it was yesterday, that another author was comparing your book to being in Dark Souls / Bloodborne. So I think it's Kwame Mbala. Said that reading your book was like going to school in Bloodborne. So I thought that was the best tweet.
All right. Excellent.
For yesterday.
I'll take it.
Exactly. So with A Deadly Education, what made you pick a school environment to write in?
It's hard to say a lot of times what makes me pick one particular thing. I was literally one day sitting down on vacation, and what I do on vacation is I write things that I'm not on deadline for. And I wrote the first 10,000 words of it in just one sitting. And it happened to be there. Now, obviously, I can sort of say that there are certain things that inspired it, right? I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, and I'm a fan of Harry Potter fandom as well. The whole giant ecosystem of fanfic and cosplay and vids and all of it. And the Scholomance itself, the folk legend, has been in my head since I was 10. I've played with it in fanfic. I've just sort of imagined the idea of it. And I really like the idea of it because of that sort of what makes you endure the Scholomance. Because, right, obviously that Bloodborne, Dark Souls, that is the thing. The Scholomance is a terrible, terrible place, right? What makes people endure? Why do people go to there? And what makes them endure it? And they survive it. And that melding the legend, the legend is obviously, it's a much older folk legend, and it comes from the perspective of this idea of older people, of older wizards going there to sort of get massive powers. People who'd already unlocked the secrets of the dark arts, going to gain more knowledge and literally study at the school run by the devil. But with the knowledge that the price is going to be one of their souls. And so essentially marrying the two, marrying the folk legend, taking the folk legend and turning it into the magical boarding school, was just, that's the kind of idea that I just have, I guess. And I think that is something that comes fairly naturally to me because I come from the fan fiction mindset, where one of the kinds of fanfic stories that I love writing most is the alternate universe or the fusion between two universes. And, you know, the pleasure of that is you get to, you know, when you take two things, a legend, a fairy tale, a trope, an existing story, when you take two different ones and you combine them and you try to find the ways that they align and the ways that they work differently, and I feel like that's a really fruitful ground for storytelling, for world building.
Mm-hmm. And the Scholomance, does it tie into Dracula? Is that correct? Or,
yes. So yeah. The Scholomance is mentioned very briefly. You know, if you read the novel, there's a point where Van Helsing is sort of describing Dracula's past and who he is, and it says, you know, he attended that Scholomance, that dark school, and in fact, I realized, actually, since our last conversation, one of the other places that I learned about the Scholomance, that I read about it as a kid, was there's a wonderful, the annotated Dracula. And it's this gigantic hardcover volume. And my aunt and uncle had a copy of it in their house. And on family holidays, when the whole clan was gathered at their place and everybody else was being social, I would creep away and, like, you know, read their books. So I read, and I was reading the annotated Dracula and reading, like, the footnotes where it talks about what is the Scholomance, what is this legend. And it's funny because, of course, I hadn't actually remembered until quite recently that's one of the places. You know, I have one of the places that I learned about the legend was from this old Time Life book called The Enchanted World that I found in my middle school library when I was about 10. But I'd actually quite forgotten that I also read this footnote in this one, you know, obscure, and that's, so, you know, in a way, right, the idea of, like, what made you write it? Well, when I was 10 years old, I came across this one paragraph in a book on a shelf, you know, but that's I think that is actually the answer, right? That seeds get planted in your brain as a writer, and then you have to mine them. You have to go and you have to let them grow.
Yes, yeah, no, that's a fair point. And you touched on then about kind of the escapism with books as well, which I'm sure this room is full of people that just kind of get lost in their books. You know, it's just wonderful, especially when it's something that can really stick with you for many years. So you can recall things from your childhood from those, you know, favorite books. Mm-hmm. So yeah, no, it's wonderful. I love when authors are keen readers as well, because sometimes that doesn't always go hand in hand. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't actually, you know, the thing is, actually, since I started writing full time, my pleasure reading has taken a nosedive. Mm-hmm. And partly that's because I do read a lot for research. Right. I read a lot of nonfiction for research. And also that I have less time, but there is probably also something else about it. I don't quite know. And I occasionally am like, why? But honestly, I mean, I was such a voracious reader when I was younger. Mm-hmm. I would read 10 books in a week, you know, and you do that for 30 years and you build up a stock. Mm-hmm. And even now, I mean, obviously I still read now, but less, I just have less time. And I frequently have to do the thing that I absolutely hate doing, which is I have to stop reading a book before I finish it in one sitting, yeah. Which I like. I literally once read a 1,000-page book in a single day just because I could not deal with stopping. But now, you know, forget it. I can't imagine having that much uninterrupted time. I miss it.
It's trickier, yes. It definitely seems somewhat indulgent to be able to sit down and read 1,000 pages. I'm sure. I wish I could. I'm sure you wish you had the time as well. But yes. So let's get talking about the book specifically. So and the idea of kind of playing with different tropes. So I quite like that the the school kind of career, like normally obviously you start at kind of year one, you know, with say the Magicians or Harry Potter, but obviously with the Deadly Education you're kind of starting it later on in their school career. Was there a reason for kind of playing with that particular trope, or?
Yes. So I wanted, one of the things that I feel is really important about the magical school trope is the rhythm of the school year, the sense of a year ending. But and I think that rhythm is important narratively, because it creates, the disjunction, right? The disjunction for the characters. It's a moment of change, of like, I have to step up now. Mm-hmm. And that's my past self, and here is the new year. And the inexorability of it, that sense of forward momentum that you can't, and you don't get to look back. You don't get to go back. You have to keep going. The school is grinding you down another level. But I like tropes. I don't like formula. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to write, it's a 4-year school. I didn't want to write freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior. I don't, because that doesn't feel valuable to me the same way. That, in fact, to me feels like a recipe for sort of having to tell the same story too many times. And having to sort of artificially find ways to make it new, which I don't really like to do. And so in fact, I thought actually when I first started writing the first book, I thought it was going to be their senior year. I thought I was writing their senior year, and it was going to be a duology originally. And I thought the first book would end with the end of senior year. And then I was actually about 80% of the way through when I realized, oh wait, no, this is junior year. And I realized that because I wrote the final scene and they hadn't graduated. And I literally, had to go back and change everything. Everything. But that's fine, because that turned out to be right for the story. And in fact, I really quite like, the first book, Deadly Education, actually takes place in a very short time frame. It's happening over a 3-week period at the end of their junior year. And so the scale it's on is like the time scale is like day by day by day. And then actually book 2, which I'm just finishing, is not on that same scale. I'm not going to spoil it, but it's quite different. And so I liked that because, again, it didn't feel like I was trying to tell, that sense of we've got to do Halloween, we've got to do, the events, and we've got to either make up reasons why the events are different or redo the same thing. It's like Quidditch season. It's right. It's hard if you've sort of boxed yourself in to that. It's quite hard. And I mean, the only time that's a good idea, I think, is when you really want to show a progression, right? Where you want to show the same character in the same event and show how they are different. But it's quite hard, I think, to do that literally on the scale of the entire school year, right? And so I didn't want to do that. So that was quite deliberate. And partly also just because, I myself, I need to be interested. I need to be learning new things about my universe as I write. And if I'm not, then I lose momentum. I lose my own motivation to keep going. And if I already know all the events of the school year, then I don't want to write them a second time, really. Yeah.
No, that's fair. And I think it does add to the kind of the immediacy and also kind of the, I suppose, sense of survival that, it's not just a whole year and you've got the kind of holiday season and people break up for the summer holidays and things, that it's actually kind of feels they're more trapped.
Yes.
in
Yes.
and
Yes.
can't kind of
Exactly.
escape.
And that, yeah. Yeah. And in fact, that wasn't originally, I thought at first when I started writing, I thought there would be a summer holiday. There would be going home. And I realized fairly early on that no, that doesn't actually make sense. No, they're not leaving. They can't leave because graduation, that's when I sort of understood what graduation was at the same time. And the architecture of the school came clear to me at that same time, which actually, I think for those who haven't seen it, actually, I should show it because I think it, one of the reasons that I wanted these blueprints done and sort of, basically harassed my poor editor and the art director at Random House to be like, I need a blueprints, is because I think it's quite hard. But if you see, right, these are the dormitories. They're like, nuts on a bolt or on a screw. And the school outside, so this is the school inside, and they rotate around every year, lowering the students down, and the new freshmen always come in at the top, the new freshman floor. And so at the time when I figured out the structure, the physical architecture of the school, that's when I realized that it was, that's when I realized, no, they're not getting out of this thing until the end. They are going to spend all 4 years in this school. And yeah, that was a quite strong, that's a strong departure for the magical school trope in general, right? But at the same time, you have to respect your own universe, right? Once you realize some of the core principles of your own universe, you can't break it just to match the formula, right? I start, because that's the thing, I like to start from tropes, but I always put, I don't put sticking to a trope, I don't put sticking to a formula high at all. It's just the place where I begin.
Yes, yeah. And talking of tropes as well, I suppose it's quite interesting how you've taken kind of the chosen one idea and generally, having the heroic lead, but he isn't the lead character. Is that kind of another kind of almost flipping the bird
Yeah.
to the trope kind of thing?
Well, it's engaging. It's engaging with the chosen one trope.
Mm.
Right, because Orion is sort of the chosen one, but who chose him, right? Who does the choosing, right? When it's the chosen one, what does it mean to be the chosen one? What, how does that happen? And the thing is, Elle is herself also chosen in a way, right? She's also got the prophecy, the destiny, and so it's kind of the trilogy is deeply engaged with the chosen one trope. And in fact, I was thinking about this because in one of these other, you do many of these events, right? In one of these events, and actually I like doing these partly because as I'm talking about the book, I find out things about it. Like the words that come out of my mouth are telling me sometimes what it is that I was doing. And it's the same connection for me where I don't think out a line and then type it out. The hands write. The brain and the hands are connected. And so similarly, the brain and the mouth are connected. And I find out what I think when I say it. But so I remembered that, one of the other sort of roots of this story, one of the other seeds of this story is Those Who Walk Away from Omelas by Ursula Le Guin. Mm-hmm. And, for those who haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's you can find it online if you just search for Omelas and Le Guin. And so the child in that story, the child in the basement, the child in the closet in that story is the right. it is, you could say that that child is a chosen one in a certain way, right? And I think that that connects with, you know, the legend from the Scholomance of the last graduate, the person whose soul is being taken, right? And so those, you know, because there are that's part of what I like doing about putting together different tropes and different stories, is finding the ways that they connect, the places, like the places that where you can make them overlap. You know, it's like if you imagine, you know, if you imagine layering images, right, in Photoshop, and you know, you make the layers transparent or something, and you can see, right, where's the point where things overlap with each other, and that's, and those are sort of clear points. Those are the points of connection that allow the story to kind of really anchor itself.
In your previous book, so especially Uprooted and Spinning Silver, it's kind of touching on Polish and Slavic folklore. And in A Deadly Education, we obviously have a character who is Welsh and Indian heritage. Was there any particular kind of folklore tales or mythology that inspired like either of those?
Well, you know, so the way that I find out who my characters are is by writing lines about them. So for instance, when I wrote Agnieszka, when I wrote Uprooted, I didn't know that she was Polish. I didn't know I was in Polnia. I didn't know where I was until, you know, many thousands of words into the story, because it was first person. So I didn't need to decide on her name until somebody finally called her Agnieszka. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in Poland. And then obviously I went back and revised with this knowledge in my head. And so with Elle, the way that I found out who she was first I wrote, you know, she was having this conversation with Orion, and he was trying to remember her name. And I knew that he did not remember her name. And I was like, what is her name? And I realized her name was Galadriel. And that she was very angry about being named Galadriel. And, you know, and in fact, so then the question is, who names their kid Galadriel? And that started her mother appearing for me. And the line about, you know, that they had lived on a commune. And I knew that, you know, I already had this sense starting of the, you know, industrial, imperial kind of thing, right? It was already connecting for me, I think, quite early on with that sort of, with the Titanic specifically, in my head, that kind of scale, that kind of sense of the machine chewing people up. And so I knew she was in the UK. And in fact, she was in a commune somewhere, and one of my friends happens to be from the UK, and was like, you know, I've been to communes in Wales, just right here. And in fact, I searched around, and I found several examples that felt like they were right to me. And then the second part of it was, you know, fairly early on, I decided that the Scholomance was going to be the only school. And the part of the reason for that, you know, and I did go back and forth on it a bit, because if it is the only school, in fact, that demands things that are quite hard to write. It demands an internationalization of the school. But the thing is that, but I chose that anyway, because it felt to me that when you're writing the boarding school, any boarding school story, right, the only school that matters is your school. It's really the only school. And other schools are always sort of fuzzy and vague and not real. And that's that's a truth, right? When you're a student, when you're sort of having your coming of age in a school, the world is your school, and it doesn't matter. Like, okay, sure, there might be other planets out there, but it's not actually relevant to me, you know, in that sense. That and I wanted to make that the literal truth in the book. Because I didn't want to fight that, and that's the thing that a lot of, you know, I feel that quite strongly, in fact, with Harry Potter, with Hogwarts, that all the other schools that have been added since are all kind of fighting. They all because it's fighting the emotional truth, right? And I didn't want to be fighting the emotional truth. So then, having made that decision, that means, okay, either the school is extremely international, you know, and reflects the demographics of the world. Or if it doesn't, to the extent that it doesn't, there has to be an explanation in the world for it. And in fact, that connects up to that sense that I had of the Scholomance as a sort of imperial thing of empire, and that connection, you know, that feeling of this engine of exploitation, right? Is, I think, what led me, you know, subconsciously again to India. And what made it conscious was I knew that her father had died getting her and her mother out. And I knew that her father was not from the UK. And I wrote the line actually where she was angry at being taught Marathi instead of Hindi, because Hindi would have been more practical. And so, you know, and that anger, that irritation itself gave me that line and told me that her father was from the Mumbai area. And then, having written that line, what I then had to do was go and do a lot of research. And the reading and research that I did for that, and that's generally what I do, you know, that's generally my process, that I research when a line requires me to do research, but I don't generally just do enough research just to kind of get away with the line. I do enough research to really understand what I'm kind of getting into with that line, what I'm committing to. And then that research and reading gets loaded up into the brain, and it's there. And so, for instance, as I went on, and then specifically when I wrote the part about the Golden Stone Sutras, that story and various other, you know, the choice that her father's family make, which I don't want to sort of spoil, but that choice, again, that all came out of the Mahabharata, and having, I actually did a course, which I actually, I highly recommend it. It's Harvard X has a free online course on Hinduism through its scriptures, where there's an excellent lecturer who sort of leads you through reading all the scriptures. And I read like bits and pieces of them before, but not in a kind of sustained way, not to really kind of understand it. And yeah, so that's where, so, you know, in a way, like the things that I know lead me to find out the things that I don't know I need to know, right? You research the line, the things that I already have loaded in, give me the line, and then the line tells me what I don't know. And by researching what I don't know, I find out the things that I don't know I need to know. And yeah, that's the process.
So we've got another couple of questions, and then we're going to open it up to some audience questions. So feel free to keep adding questions in the chat, and we'll have a look at those very, very soon. But for now, should we go on to adaptations? So I see that Universal Pictures has picked up the rights to the Scholomance series. Is there any information at this point, or is it all very hush hush?
No more than that. That's it. You know, it's, the thing is, you know, I say this, right? You can't as a writer get hung up on waiting on Hollywood and hoping. It happens or it doesn't. that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And and I'm very happy with the partners that I have on this project. Mandeville Films are the ones who sort of are producing, and I'm really happy with them and the writers that they found. And we've had some early conversations that were really good, and where in fact I felt like they told me things that I was like, you're right, that I didn't know about my book. Which is always the thing that I'm looking for in any kind of reader and so forth. So yes, but that's basically I'm very happy with that. But yeah, you can't wait, you can't expect movies. It's the first step in a very, very, very long, complicated, and prone to failure process. So you just
No, that's fair. Have you thought about kind of any of the adaptations, like graphic novels or things like that as well? Would you like to kind of see that in the universe?
Yeah, I would love to. There's Random House in the US, Del Rey did this wonderful thing where they commissioned some fan artists to do some art. And obviously we got some art made, the blueprints and sketches of the rooms, and are working on some more. And I do like that. I like the sort of I like transformation, right? I like transformative work. That's why I'm a fanfic writer and fitter, and I like seeing my work be transformed. So that's always a delight. It's always just because there is, for me, I believe in the making of art. I believe in the making of art, and I believe in art being in conversation with other art. That's what I'm always interested in and care about. And so when someone makes art of a different kind of art out of my books, a different piece of art, out of my books, that's always just wonderful and exciting.
So you touched on then your kind of fan fiction, and I think now is a good time to talk about the Organisation for Transformative Works. So obviously fandoms tend to take a life of their own. Can you tell us about your involvement with this process, and also what fandoms you belong to?
Oh, I am a fanish, but I don't stay very long in any one fandom. I have been, yeah, I could say which ones haven't I been in. But so with the archive, right? So I wrote fan fiction for 10 years before I ever wrote pro fiction. I was working on my computer science degree. I was going to make computer games, and then in 2004, I sold the first Temeraire book and started writing full time, and instead I started coding for fun. So I sort of inverted my career plan, and around then the place where I participated in fandom most was on LiveJournal. And around that time, there was, I think that fandom learned earlier than, and I think the lesson that I think we are all learning now, which is that when you surrender the commons to corporations for free, right, in exchange for getting something apparently for free, that you pay in ways that you don't recognize at first. And so social media, the problem is, so much of public life and public discourse has been surrendered to corporations whose only interest is in showing you ads, and who have to keep your eyes on the screen on their site inundating you with advertising in order to make money. And they've built algorithms whose purpose is to generate more money for them. And the total lack of, and they don't acknowledge a responsibility to the communities that they host. They don't recognize a responsibility to society, because that's not what corporations are for. Corporations are for making money. But the problem is that, and that's okay if there are public spaces, if there is a commons, and there isn't, and what we learned in fandom was that these sites that invite you in and invite people, and fandom is of course extremely appealing to these sites, because what fans do is they create fan works that attract other people to the site, and in fact they're using they're making transformative work, but the overall effect is to essentially be a buffer between these sites and the copyright rights of the holders of the original source material. And so you get tons of fan art on Twitter, and you get, or people just have conversations, right, about their favorite show and what happened, right? It's like the water cooler chats. And people make friends and build communities and share art on these platforms. But the platform will then just sail right in and just delete it if it suits them. If it's not making money for them, they'll just delete your entire community, and they'll delete everything you've built, and they will not care, because they never did care. If you're not, there's a good line about this, which is, if you are not paying, and that's true, right? We are essentially, whenever we go on social media, we are making ourselves, we're selling our eyes effectively, and we're selling space in our brains to these companies. And we're helping sell our friends to them as well. And so basically the archive kind of grew out of this, the sense that we needed to own the site. We needed to own the site. It needed to be not for profit. And that was the only way that we would actually be able to make it preserve art, preserve the art that we were making, as much as possible, preserve the history of our community. And that, and that goal has I think been realized. And obviously, I'm not involved on a day-to-day basis anymore with the archive or the organization, but I'm so incredibly proud of everybody who's involved, and the team that has built the archive, that keeps building the archive, that runs the archive, and that runs all the projects of the organization, and I think it's made a real difference. And and I do in fact think and hope that it's a kind of model for how communities can own their own platforms, and should own their own platforms, and what a vast difference it makes in terms of how they function and the values that they have.
Yeah, definitely. It's very important. I was having a very similar conversation. We did an interview with Cory Doctorow the other day, and we were talking about copyright issues, and obviously having ebooks and audio, and quite often he retains the rights to those, so he can kind of choose to make them freely available to people, or to basically give people that knowledge and that independence, which is it's just amazing, because obviously with places like the dreaded A word, selling it for the lowest bidder, then it's important to make these works of, whether it's artwork, fan fiction, original fiction, make them available for all. So it's really, really important. But yeah, no, it's fascinating stuff, because you don't I think especially during lockdown, I think a lot of people have, we have become reliant on, ordering from Amazon and various places like that because it's very convenient. You don't always think about the
Right.
implications and the ramifications of doing so.
And I mean, the thing is, right, it's, I think we do think of the ramifications, and we know. And the problem is that just, when you're in a situation where everything is really hard, and you're like, I need diapers, and you're like, it's just click, right? And in fact, look, I actually think that I think that Amazon is great. I think Amazon is infrastructure. And I don't think Amazon, I don't think Amazon should actually be a publisher. I don't think, right, in that way. It's just, the innovation has been really remarkable. In fact, I mean, on an engineering standpoint, right, Amazon Web Services, sorry, this is like developer hat for a second, the decoupling all their services internally this is I'm sorry, I'm being an incredibly boring nerd, but they decoupled internally all their services, right? So that's why you get Amazon Web Services ultimately, because essentially they sort of made the company into separate pieces internally that then, were providing services to each other through these well-defined interfaces that they could then expose to other developers. And that model, right, of making computing services available in the cloud is brilliant. Just so many smart, good innovations. But at the same time, it's, monopolies are bad. Monopolies are bad for everybody, because monopolies ultimately destroy innovation. And I feel like we just, again, we're back to the place of, you need certain things to be in the commons. We need to, we need to have certain things have to be broadly available. And yeah, and I sort of feel like that's and that's the tension, right? That this sort of this ideal of disruption, where disruption is bad for a lot of, disruption can produce really great new ideas, move things forward, change things for the better, but an excessive disruption creates upheaval, right? When you can't rely on anything. That's, yeah, sorry, I will now stop.
No, it's very, very interesting. I'm going to, one more question from me, and then I'm going to pick some brilliant questions we've had from everyone attending this evening. So if you had to pick, I'm going to lighten the mood now, 3 authors to attend the Scholomance, like 3 people who you think make it through, who are just like kick-ass.
No, I'm sorry. I don't know. I wouldn't send anyone to the Scholomance. No.
Even if they'd find it easy.
No.
No.
No. I mean, look, the thing is, right, obviously the experience of reading this book is not, I did not intend for the experience of reading this book to be the experience of living through the Scholomance. That was not my goal. And so you have the Scholomance mediated through Galadriel and the thing herself in order to survive the Scholomance. And she armors herself with sarcasm and wit, and anger, and also that it's an observation, and sort of unflinching observation of the sort of absurdities as well as the realities. And so I hope that the book is actually fun to read. I wanted the book to be fun to read, but there are places, right, where the curtain gets peeled back and you see you get glimpses of the actual experience that she's having. And that is the truth, right? And, I wanted those actual experience. I wanted you to know what's really going on with her, even while not actually on that unbearably terrible level. But that's, but I cannot imagine, like, not my worst enemy. It's just, it's because that's actually the fundamental point of it. What sends people here? What is it that makes people send their children to this place? And it's just, and obviously there's the quick answer, which is the odds of surviving on the outside are so much worse than the odds of surviving on the inside. But that's the sort of the quick answer. And the larger answer, right, is power and hunger, and the inability to sort of look at your own complicity, right? And that's sort of the deeper answer that's coming through there. And so yeah, I cannot, not sending anyone to the Scalaman's. No. I could name some politicians maybe who.
No.
but no. But even there, it's yeah, no.
Fair enough. So we've got a few questions from the audience. So we have from Daisy: what advice would you give to writers wanting to create a world from scratch as you did in Uprooted and Spinning Silver? What process works best for you?
So the answer is that I first of all, there is no one right process, and way that I work is routinely when I talk to other authors, my process is extremely weird and not the process that other people do. And whatever process works for you is the right one. I will say, so the way that I build stories, the way that I build worlds, I don't sit down and build my world before I start writing. It's the same thing with how I write, how I find out who my characters are. I write the first line, and then I write the second line, and then a third line. With Uprooted, for instance, the first line was, "Our dragon doesn't eat the girls he takes." This literally tells me there's a dragon. It's our dragon. It belongs to this community, and they think of this dragon as somehow belonging to them. The dragon takes girls. This is obviously, and again, frankly, it's not from scratch. It's literally building on dragon legends and dragon stories, the classic story of giving sacrifice the maiden, the virgin, to the dragon, to the monster. And then, so, all right, great. That I've got some interesting questions. I'm interested by this first line, and then the second line was, I don't remember my own second line, but it was basically like he's a wizard and he protects us, and we're grateful. He protects us from the wood and we're grateful. But if he wanted to kill one of us, every 10 years, our fathers would band together and kill him. And that line, that second line, was again, it's connected back to the dragon legend, right? Which is, in that dragon legend, the legend of sacrificing someone. You put up a sacrificial victim. The community chooses like a scapegoat and put someone out there. This tells you that this community is not doing that. This community, in fact, would refuse to do that. That this community is healthy enough and strong enough and loving enough, right? That this narrator who's speaking to us knows without a question, and she is herself already, it tells you, right, if our fathers, right, wanted to eat one of us, right, that suggests that she is one of the potential victims. right? That she's one of the potential girls who could be taken. And she has no doubt, right? She's just telling you this as a straight fact. And obviously, it could be that she would turn out to be wrong, but she isn't. I felt that quite strongly, that when I was writing that line, that was a true line. That was a true line about her community. And Agnieszka, the narrator who I later found out was Agnieszka, knew this, that she was a member of a healthy, loving, a healthy community that was good to the people in it. And I also found out that tells me there was a wood, and there's the dragon was not actually a literal dragon. He was a wizard. Like, I didn't know that. All right, that's quite interesting. And then I write the next line. And so each line, effectively, as I write each line gives me questions and tells me, and as I write it, as I write the next line that answers those questions, it gives me answers plus fresh questions, and that all builds the world. And what happens, right, is every so often as I go along, I will write a line that contradicts something else. And when that happens, I have to make a choice. Which line stays? Which thing have I written? And that is about having a kind of holistic sense of the world as it is so far, trying to understand what is important in this world that I'm building. So in Uprooted, community was clearly at the heart of it. And so based on that, then making choices, choosing whichever thing is more true to the overall world as I understand it at that time. And if it's the second line that is more true, then I go back and revise. And in fact, very often it's the second line that is true, because I've written it after I've had more of the world built, and I've gotten a better sense of the world. And sometimes, in fact, it involves revising quite a lot, quite heavily, but I'm not afraid. I like to revise. For me, revising is the fun part. And I'm constantly in a revising cycle. As I write, I'm constantly going back in that way, because I'm finding out new pieces of my world. And I'm finding out new things about my characters. And as a result, my characters and worlds and plot are all very tightly coupled. And in terms of plot, I always choose, you have to put character first. I feel pretty strongly about that. The character has to do what is right for the character to do, given their circumstances, given who they are. And you can't kind of let yourself get away as an author with letting your characters do something that fits with a preconceived idea of where the story is going, if it turns out when you get to that moment that your character would not do that. But yeah, so because of that, that's how I build my worlds. But obviously, that comes, the moment at which I start writing the story is not the moment where the story begins. The story, like the Scholomont, started when I was 10 years old, right? So in terms of advice, my advice is, when you're 10, start reading, random books that you find in your library. But, it doesn't have to be when you're 10. It's the experiences that you have. Engage with them with curiosity, explore them. Don't be afraid to sort of ask yourself questions about them. And, the idea of starting from scratch also, no work of art stands alone. If it did stand alone, it would be incomprehensible and it would be meaningless, right? Work it has to be in conversation. It is in conversation, even if, sometimes you don't admit that it's in conversation, but that's a lie. And sometimes you may not recognize, right? You may not recognize, you may not remember where the roots of your story are planted, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have roots. And, and the more you look at your roots and think about them and really ask yourself questions about it, so for instance, the way that I was talking about choosing to make the Scholomance the one school, and then grappling with what that meant. If I'd never read a boarding school, if I'd never read about a magical boarding school before and never understood and never sort of identified that as a problem, right, as an inconsistency, then I might not have asked myself that question. I might have just said, it's just, it's a boarding school. It's a boarding school, and not have then grappled with the deeper questions, which in fact, I think, were really important to grapple with. And so that's what I think. I think asking yourself a lot of questions, and also separately, writing a lot. That's just always the advice that I give. Writing a lot and finishing a lot. It's very tempting, especially if what you like to do is world build. It's very tempting to sort of write yourself a first chapter, interesting world, and then you get stuck a little bit and you're like, I'm going to go off and invent another interesting world, and you don't finish that. You can't do that. You have to fight through the problems. And you have to be willing to change your world. You have to be willing to tinker with your world, rather than expect that you're going to build the world first, mm-hmm. and then write the story.
Mm-hmm. So we have another question from Francesca saying, what prompted you to make the jump from writing fanfic to your own fiction? And do you feel any apprehension when you're showing kind of your own worlds and characters to people? Does it feel like more nerve-wracking, I suppose?
No. When I, what inspired me, what prompted me was, in fact, I was working on a doctorate in computer science, and a friend of mine said, hey, I've been invited to work on this computer game project, and we really need a developer, but we kind of can't afford a developer. We've got a spot for a designer. And I was like, well, I wanted to work in computer games. It was really, that was something that I was quite passionate about. And the problem was that at the time, this was quite long ago, there wasn't really a big computer game industry in Manhattan, in the city. And my husband's job was in the city. And so moving was, I didn't want to move, so I was like, great, I will take this opportunity. And I went and worked for a year on the project. And in two separate ways, it led me to writing novels. One was that I was able to, that we had to structure the story. When you're building a computer game, especially one that has a narrative, that has a through line, a plot, you can't write the whole story necessarily and then hand it over, as in our case. The artists had to work at the same time as us. So they had to work on the cinematics, they had to work on the settings. So you had to make a lot of decisions in advance. You did have to outline. And even though I don't outline now myself as a writer, the process of doing it for the game kind of taught me to integrate the sort of the engineering, that sort of structural sense of the work as a whole, with the pleasure of just writing individual scenes and short pieces. And basically I finished that project, and I wrote, and the next fandom that I was in after I came off that project, before then, I think the longest story that I'd written was a few thousand, like 5,000 words, 6,000 words, something like that. And all of a sudden, the first fandom that I was in, first of all, I started writing alternate universe stories much more, and messing with canon a lot more. And I wrote, and the stories all got longer. Like there was like a 10,000 word story. There was like a 14,000, 18,000, 25,000, it's sort of just like And that was because I'd suddenly learned how to structure the story in a different way. And the moment at which I was like, wait a second, I think this is original, I think this is me, was the moment where I realized I was not actually interested in writing about the characters in the fandom. I was in Aubrey Maturin, Patrick O'Brien fandom. And the Master and Commander movie, which is great. And I was writing, and I was like, I was much more interested in the details of the world that I was building, and I wanted to know more about the world that I was in, more than I wanted to see. I wasn't interested. It was like Aubrey and Maturin are kind of in my way, and I was sort of like, hang on, I want to move you out of the way and look at the actual world that I'm in. And that's when I sort of was like, this is not fanfic. That's the difference to me, because great fanfic, artistically speaking, I don't value one more than the other. I think a great fan fiction story is not less great because it's fanfic. It's just not. It just means that it's not that you can't publish it commercially. But commerce and art are not the same thing. Commerce is nice. I like being able to pay my bills by writing, but and obviously it's what makes it possible for me to invest the time to write at novel length. Mm-hmm. But that artistically, the difference between fanfic and original fiction is that a fanfic story should not, some fanfic stories can stand on their own, but they're really not, they're certainly, they don't quite. To me, a really good fanfic story should be so intimately coupled with the original material, right? It has to be about the original material in a certain sense. Where, if it's original and you're having, it's more of a conversation, it's not the same thing as being deeply embedded, deeply enmeshed with it. And that was the thing that and once I started doing it, obviously it's just, at that point, my book sold. And so I was able to switch to doing it full time. And I really liked that, partly because the computer game industry wasn't around near me at the time, and was operating on a kind of really unhealthy sort of crunch mode mentality also, which is still a problem. The idea that, coders show how great they are by working like 80 hours a week. And I feel like, no, that's not good. That's not good for humans, and that's not good for code. But that sort of mindset was embedded in it. And so I felt like that wasn't going to work for me in terms of like career-wise, but I in fact enjoyed so much the process of design that having full creative control, which of course writing novels gives you in a way that very, very few other artistic endeavors do, was very appealing.
So we had a question from Clara saying, presuming you obviously wrote under a pseudonym or a fanfic name, would you share?
Yeah, no, sorry, I don't give it out. You can find it pretty. It's not a secret in fandom, but I don't share it the other way, because fandom is where I go to play. If you're a fan, you can find. If you're a fan and you're in my fandoms, you will, and you like to read fanfic, you will find my stories probably, because that's what fandom is for. Fandom will take you to the stories that you want to read. And I don't, I don't, because look, and one of the other things, and in fact, one of the reasons why I recommend fandom and fanfic as a place for new writers to go and to work is, in fandom, you have a peer relationship with all the other writers, right? If you're in Harry Potter fandom, you have exactly as much authority about whether Harry would do a certain thing as any other writer in your circle, right? And what that means is you can get a kind of feedback, a kind of reader response that is from readers, as opposed to what you get in a workshop, right? You go to a writing workshop, you get responses from other writers in a writing mindset who are often, especially newer writers, are often, in that, I think it often happens, the same way that you get this in like mommy circles, right? Where it's like, no, you must do, you must like, I don't know, trying to think, you must like sleep train your child, you must let them cry it out, or you must not let them cry it out. You're terrible, you're traumatizing them forever. They won't learn to sleep, they'll traumatize, right? And it becomes a holy war to the extent that you're invested in your own choice, right? Because you care so much about your own work that seeing somebody else doing something different can potentially be a source of insecurity, right, for a new writer. And therefore, the advice that they give is frequently like, do it more like me, which is not right. It has to be, do it like you, but better, right? But the problem is that is very, very, that's a skill. To give that kind of feedback, to learn how to give that kind of feedback is a really complicated skill. And in fandom, you don't have to have it in the same way, because if you're in the same fandom and you get betas who are interested in the same, trope, the same pairing, the same missing scene, the same, whatever, if they're interested enough and to read and they want to read your story, right? People in fandom want to read fanfic. They're there, they want more, and they will want your story and then respond to it as readers wanting that story just at its best, right? And I think that's really useful.
Definitely. So bringing things back to the trilogy, we have a question from Molnar saying, what are your plans after finishing the trilogy, and are you thinking of doing any spin-off stories like you did with the Temeraire series?
I suspect not. I mean, I don't say never, but this trilogy is in fact basically a standalone story in my head. I had started book 3 before I went back and finished book 1 for publication. My goal had been to actually finish, but it was supposed to be a duology and then it turned into a trilogy, so I was not able to completely finish. But yeah, and I don't know. I didn't know that this was going to be the next thing. I'll find out after I finish. I'll find out what's next after I finish it.
So we have another question from Timothy asking, what are your kind of recommendations for good collections of myths and legends to, for really kind of fun research? What would you recommend?
Oh, I mean, honestly, when I am looking for a collection of for anything, I have a secret. I do have a secret pro tip for how to find a really good. It works for almost anything, like technical books. It works for history, survey books. It works it works for myths and legend too, I suspect. Which is, you go on Amazon and you find the one, and you find sometimes you just, and you find like the ratings, and one has just like the great rating. But in fact, what you do is you find the one that has bad ratings, and you look in the comments for somebody who has angrily written a diatribe. This book is terrible. It's awful. You should read this book, because that person, that reviewer, is the person who cares and knows what they're talking about, right? And you get the book that they recommend. and very, very often I've been led to extremely good collections that way. And but actually also, right now, in fact, I think we're probably, for obvious reasons, we're having an explosion of online courses and things like that. So I do highly recommend the Harvard X, the course that I described, the Hinduism through its scriptures. It's not the only one. They have basically a course like that on every major religion through its scriptures. And based on the one that I took, it was just really great. So I highly recommend those. Yeah.
Brilliant. So we're coming to our last kind of couple of questions now. So if you had the opportunity to write within another author's world, is there a particular one that you would love to be able to write within?
I'm trying to think. I don't know. I mean, the thing is, I can write it anytime I want. I can just write a fantasy story whenever I want. It's like, can't stop me. Fair use. And in terms of doing it commercially, I don't think I would. Mm-hmm. Because the problem with doing it commercially, right, is, if you read tie-in novels are not fan fiction, mm-hmm. because it's too preoccupied with commerciality. And I don't, obviously I'm very glad that my books are commercial. And I'm glad that they sell well enough that I get to keep doing this. But I try not to think about that, because I feel like that's a really good way as an author just to sort of mess yourself up. And you have to, at least for me, I want to be an artist first. Mm-hmm. I want to make good art. And I don't think, I could imagine collaborating, but the problem with collaborating on things, for me, at least right now in my life as it is currently, is in fact the same problem that is at the root of why so many movie projects don't get made, which is that any collaborative art means that it's not just one person's many random life events that can interfere with it actually happening. It is the random life events of both people. And if you have random life events that intersect badly with each other, then the whole project can easily fall apart. It's really hard. And right now my life has a lot of random life events in it. So yeah.
So we will finish off quickly with, so obviously the big thing, I suppose, of the last year is kind of everyone doing elevator pitches and everything being like 30 seconds or less, like hook me in. So for anyone here who hasn't yet read it.
Sorry. Wait, Laura, I have to be like, I can't do elevator pitches. I'm absolutely like, as may have been evident in the rest of this talk, once you wind up the little doll, it goes for a really long time. So I just sort of jump from one piece of the story to the other. I'm absolutely lousy at elevator pitches. So I can't give elevator pitches. Like, no.
They should just read it. They should read it. It's like, here it is. I mean, and we saw the exquisite artwork. So yeah.
Read us the blurb. All right. Here we go. I mean, I just feel like I decided that Orion Lake needed to die after the second time he saved my life. I feel like that's the first line. That's, look, it's blueprint.
And it's I mean, that's enough to kind of like, yeah. I was excited about it anyway, and then when it came through the post, I read that, and then I was just like, yeah, you got me. So it's excellent. I cannot wait for book 2, which are we looking at the kind of same time next year, hopefully?
I mean, I'm literally trying to finish it. I don't know that. I don't think it's actually. I think it's going to be earlier. I think it's going to be in summer of next year. I think that's the current plan. Maybe no, maybe that right. Yes, I actually I have no idea. I don't know what day it is. Is it Friday? I think it's Friday, but I'm not 100% sure.
I've heard rumors that it's Friday, so it could well be. But yes, yeah. So thank you so much for this evening for such a interesting Q&A and learning more about the Scholomance. I'm sure obviously everyone in the room who hasn't ordered it will be ordering it, will be reading it very, very soon. And yeah, I just want to thank everyone for attending this evening, and yeah, we hope to do again very soon. So thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy your weekends.
Yes. Don't let the Maleficaria bite. Thank you all. Hi, James. Nice.